My guest today has been called the Mick Jagger of political and economic punditry. I wonder if that means he can't get no satisfaction. Paul Krugman is a Nobel laureate and prolific commentator on matters political and economic. He is here to share his thoughts and insights on these most extraordinary of times, and also to discuss his most recent book, Arguing with Zombies: Economics, Politics, and the Fight for a Better Future. I am most pleased to have Professor Krugman here today. Paul, welcome.
Hi there.
Hi there. Okay, let's start off with zombies for a moment. And for those that don't know or might be somewhat unfamiliar with your work, just give us the definition of a zombie, because I assume you're not talking about the 60s band, and I assume you're not talking about The Walking Dead. You're talking about policies that just seem to never want to die.
A zombie idea is an idea that should be dead because it's been proved wrong. It's been tried against experience. It's been, we had the evidence, should have died long ago, but it just keeps on going, just shambles along and eats people's brains. And it's something like the idea cutting taxes pays for itself because of the wonderful things it does. And a lot of our economic discussion in the United States and some of other areas as well, but economics is most of what I focus on, is not actually between there's one group of reasonable people who think this and there's another group of reasonable people who think that. It's between what every reasonable person knows and a zombie idea that refuses to die.
Well, one of the zombie ideas that you have in your book deals with the fear of deficit spending.
Yeah.
And in these times, it would seem to me that we're about to get a boatload of deficit spending. Your thoughts on that?
No problem. I mean, it should do it well, and should never completely ignore deficits, but there's absolutely no reason to worry for the United States, for the countries of Western Europe, for Japan. None of us, we're all able to borrow money at extremely low interest rates. There's no hint of a problem. Markets are basically begging us to borrow money, and now we have a whole bunch of urgent needs to spend, both directly to fight this pandemic and also to insulate our economies from the economic fallout. So yeah, deficits. If we react to this the way that a lot of countries reacted to the financial crisis, which was to get all frantic about budget deficits, we can turn what is already going to be a human catastrophe into an economic catastrophe as well.
During the Great Depression, they were able to engage in deficit spending at that point with public works programs.
Yeah.
But if we can't work together, if we can't be in physical proximity to one another, what would you recommend would be the most effective approach in this environment right now in terms of the deficit spending and the programs that they might institute? Because we can't have public works programs.
Well, in fact, construction will probably continue. But no, in any case, what we need right now, this thing is unfolding with incredible speed. It's terrifying speed. It makes the financial crisis of 2008 look slow. So you need stuff that can happen right away. And the trouble with building new railroad tunnels and things like that is that those projects take years to reach peak spending. We should be doing them anyway, but right now you need stuff that has very quick effect. And the two big things are just plain give people cash. We can give probably some cash to everybody, and we can give people who are especially hard hit by this thing extra cash, and give state and local governments in the U.S., which are have balanced budget restrictions. They who are themselves finding themselves cash strapped, they can get aid from the federal government. But at this point is really not about starting public works. It's about giving people money.
What about the Ben Bernanke era sort of thought about helicopter drops?
People, I think, are a little confused about what helicopter drops. Probably if the audience doesn't know, it's actually something that came from Milton Friedman, who talked about just sending a helicopter out to drop money on people's heads, and as a thought experiment. The Federal Reserve, its counterparts in other countries, they just create money with we used to say a stroke of the pen. Now it's with the click of a mouse. But anyway, they create money out of thin air, but people treat it as real money. The thing is, though, that they don't actually have the power to just give people money. All they can do is buy assets. So when the Fed bails out banks, it does it by buying assets from the banks. And I don't think legally they have the right to just plain drop money on people's heads. But if we ask the question, if Congress votes to give people money, and you worry where's the money going to come from? Well, you don't actually have to sell bonds. The Fed can supply that money, or you can sell the bonds to the Fed, which is just another arm of the government. So that's really the trouble. Helicopter money is a fiscal thing. It's strictly speaking within the realm of things that only Congress has the right to do, but it can be financed by the Fed. So you can't ask Jay Powell to do this on his own. I don't think the law will allow him to. But if Jay Powell and Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump get together to do it, no problem. We can start it tomorrow.
And then from a technical point of view, do we have to wait for 2 quarters to demonstrate that we are technically in a recession? Or is it fair to say, all indications are, boom, we're there?
Yeah, actually, the U.S. doesn't even use the 2-quarter definition. The U.S. defines recessions. It's a recession if the Recession Dating Committee says it's a recession. And the Recession Dating Committee looks at a bunch of stuff. But at this point, look, we have the real world. First of all, just look around you, right? So companies are laying off thousands of people, right? And then the early wave, the leading edge of the economic data, the manufacturing surveys, unemployment claims, they all say it's a tsunami. It's if you wait for more evidence, it's like, well, gee, it's funny, the ocean level has kind of dropped out there. I wonder if something's about to happen. There's a giant wave heading this way, and everybody knows it.
One of the other zombies in your book deals with tax cuts. Yeah. And one of the thoughts that's being kind of bandied about as a solution is tax cuts. Yeah. How is there a way to kind of balance that? Businesses are going to need some help. Small businesses will need help, et cetera. How would you kind of strike that balance?
Some businesses that may need help, but then if you want to help people, give them help. There's no particular reason. It's not if you do any kind of across-the-board cut in taxes, the question is that directing money to the people who need the help most? Is it? By and large, the people who are going to be paying the most taxes are going to be the ones who need the help least. We're worried that millions of people are going to lose their jobs. If you cut the Social Security tax, that doesn't do anything for somebody who isn't earning any money. Sure. So this is a tax in I won't say the tax cuts never have a role here, but there's hard to come up with any reason why that should be. If you're going to be trying to direct money to people, why do it through tax cuts except because it fits an ideology which has said that tax cuts are the magical answer to everything?
Understood. One of the other zombies deals with austerity. I think it's fair to say that's a zombie that is going to be at least asleep for a while, would you say?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the idea that that the government should tighten its belt in hard times because that's what people do, is that is a zombie. It never dies. It always comes back. Some places more than others. I wouldn't count on it. I mean, the United States, I think we're. It's not an issue right now. But I think the Republicans never actually believed in austerity. They only believed in hobbling Democratic presidents. But but in Europe, they failed to reach an agreement on any kind of Europe-wide stimulus. In a way, the problem with austerity in America was a problem because Republicans pretended to believe in it. In Europe, it's a problem because the Germans actually do believe in it, and unfortunately, I think they still do, even in a time of pandemic.
And even now.
So now they're saying, oh, we're going to do some stimulus, but you actually look at it and it's ridiculously tiny, not remotely up to it. So we have a real problem. I mean, the two biggest obstacles to sane economic policy right now are let's be blunt, the Republican Party of the United States and the entire nation of Germany.
Okay, and who should take the lead then? Do you think in Europe? I mean. Clearly, there's got to be some leadership, some aspect of that, correct?
Well, yeah. The question is, Europe has a real leadership gap. It's there are no individuals who have the kind of stature. I mean, Angela Merkel still has considerable personal stature, but she's never used it for on economics, and nobody else. I mean, the French are talking more sense than the Germans are, but not not clear that they have the weight in the in the European Union, and this is a case when the British might be helpful, but they just left. So I'm not sure who's going to do this. I mean, we have a definite. We are approaching this crisis. It's even worse. In 2008, we had problems, and we had some weak leadership in some places, and there were a lot of. But compare the people. Particularly not just at the highest level, but sort of a couple of levels down, finance ministers around the world, compared with a dozen years ago. It's like we've become an inferior race of human beings. We just have a really, really poor collection of people in charge now.
Mm-hmm. Are you concerned about a feedback loop, because it is a global economy? Okay, and if Europe really doesn't do enough of the things that they really should do, then could we have that kind of feedback loop between Europe and the United States and the world economy because they're not stepping up enough?
Yeah, I mean, no, some of those things are a little bit weaker than people imagine. I mean, when all is said and done, U.S. sends about 2% of what we make to Europe, and the Europeans send them maybe 2.5% of what they make to us. And so it's not as if there's a tremendous amount of direct market linkage, but there's some, and there's a lot of psychological spillover and financial spillover too. So if Europe slides into a recession, which looks, actually, I think it's everyone sliding into a recession. All of these things. The Chinese are, we think of China only as a competitor, but it's also a market, and China appears to have had its first economic contraction, literal fall in GDP, since the Cultural Revolution. There is a lot of global feedback going along. I mean, each of us is messing up individually, but collectively we're making it even worse.
Understood. One more zombie to deal with, and that deals with the economy, with the environment.
Yeah.
Okay. And regulation and bad, and government is the problem, and so on and so forth. Is that a zombie that, at least for now, for the moment, is going to be like put aside or ignored, or how do you see that playing into the role of where we are at now?
Yeah, I mean, we were doing nothing about it a month ago, and we will continue doing nothing about it for the next couple of months. I hope that it'll come back. I mean, in the end, it's the most important issue out there, and the climate change denial is literally. I mean, everything else is bad, but that's existential. We're putting the future of civilization on the line, and we seem to be making some progress under Obama, and then that's all fallen apart. So now we'll see. I think really realistically, if the political power changes hands in the United States, we have a new administration that once again takes the climate threat seriously, then I'm all for a Green New Deal.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Sure.
Yeah, and nobody knows quite what a Green New Deal means, which is a great advantage. A Green New Deal would be all of it. We'd be investing in lots of stuff. We'd be investing in infrastructure. We'd be investing in energy technology. We would do, no doubt, some taxes on emissions. Put a grab bag of stuff, have a lot of goodies for lots of people, because that's how you get something done politically. But above all, just act. And so I'm hoping, that Times columnist, so I'm not allowed to do endorsements. But let me say, I look forward to February 2021 when the Biden administration unveils an enormous environmental program.
Yeah, maybe that'll tie in, at that point, and then we'll see where we're at economically.
Yeah, that's right. Economically, who knows? It's all of these things. I mean, the world already. sometimes it makes sense to just calm down. But right now, the world is already a completely different looking place than it was just a month and a half ago.
Can monetary policy ever be not political? I mean, they say that, Fed should be independent, et cetera, but I mean, monetary policy is going to have an influencing factor on the political environment. And, how is it not, let's say in a worst case scenario, it would be backstopping bad behavior.
That's I know people who worry about that that central banks are going to encourage politicians to be irresponsible. Haven't seen any of that. I mean, the reality. I mean, it's funny because the modern idea of the independent central bank, the modern idea in which Ben Bernanke or a Mario Draghi is a superstar independent of the political process, that's a new thing. And it was created because people feared that governments would be inflationary, which has not been the problem actually in recent years and basically anywhere except Venezuela. But as it's turned out, those independent central bankers have been good guys. Bernanke helped hold things together in America. In Europe, Mario Draghi saved the euro by backstopping sovereign debt. He said whatever it takes, and that ended a panic attack that almost sank the whole euro. So at the moment, it seems to be a system that's working well, and particularly, I guess, maybe you could say that the Fed and the European Central Bank appear to be a lot less zombie infested than other parts of the power structure on both sides of the Atlantic.
Mm-hmm. Where does income inequality fit within the context of everything that's going on now? And I would imagine that when you have massive deficits then start to come about because of the programs that are instituted, where's the money going to come from, so on and so forth, and inequality has become exacerbated. So
I think in terms of where the money's going to come from, it's really just first, it's not a problem. We live in a world which is awash in savings with no place to go. Mm-hmm. People want to save. Businesses don't want to invest that much. That's why interest rates are so low and just not a problem. You can borrow the money. And income inequality, there's probably some economic problems that get made worse and other things too. I mean, part of our problem with the pandemic is that there are lots of people without health insurance who can't afford to stay home from work and so on. So all of that. But the real thing, in terms of my zombies theme, is most, not all, but most of the zombies, what keeps them alive, is actually money from billionaires. I mean, climate change denial is almost entirely something that is sustained by fossil fuel billionaires. Tax cut zombie is entirely sustained by right-wing hired guns, propagandists, because rich people like to disseminate the idea that cutting taxes on rich people is good for the economy.
And so policies, so let's say we go through this valley, okay?
Yeah.
Economic valley. What does it look like? I mean, it's difficult to know, but what would you imagine it looks like 3 months, 6 months down the road where we are at? Business as usual? Because a lot of investors are going to look at this from the point of view of what does it mean for earnings and,
Yeah. What a lot of us, certainly the way I've been putting it for a while is that I didn't know where the next bump in the road was going to come from, but that our shock absorbers were shot, that we had no good way to respond. But that was always hard to get people's attention about because we hadn't hit the bump yet. Now everybody can see it. Now everybody's out there looking and seeing that how hard it is for us to respond, and maybe we get a change in mindset. I mean, I'd like to imagine that we come out of this with a renewed appreciation for the fact that there are some jobs we do need the government to do. That we have that we see the government cope with a public health crisis and also with the economic fallout from that crisis. And people say, oh yeah, maybe the New Deal idea made sense. Maybe FDR knew what he was talking about, and maybe John Maynard Keynes knew what he was talking about, and that we come out. I think, but businesses, stock market predictions are a mug's game, and I've been the mug myself, so I know better than that. But I will say that it does a lot of assets until just a few weeks ago were priced as if nothing bad would ever happen again.
Sure.
And something bad always does happen, and here we go.
Sure. In a larger context, neoliberalism.
Yeah.
Let's use that as an economic theory since Hayek, Friedman, 1980, political, change that takes place with Reagan and Thatcher, et cetera. Do you think that now we're going to see a shift in that to another economic ideology that kind of takes hold?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think neoliberalism is a useful term. It's less an economic theory than an attitude. It's kind of private sector good, government bad, except in very exceptional circumstances, and it should take a hit. We should have a much more expansive view of the role of the government, but of course that should have happened after the financial crisis too, and didn't happen nearly as much as I thought it would. So maybe we go through this one as well. Although a lot of what goes on, I do talk about this in Arguing with Zombies. A lot of what goes on in political economy of this stuff is that conservatives tend to oppose even government programs that don't obviously hurt rich people because they fear there's kind of a halo effect. If people see that government action is effective in one area, they tend to become more sympathetic towards government action in another. And to the extent that I think they're right about that, so the neoliberal attitude, because that's really what it is, it's more of an attitude than a theory. The neoliberal attitude has got to take a hit from this. We've just seen that. I mean, why was Donald Trump spending weeks pretending that there was no real threat? Because he was afraid that if people did think there was a threat, they would demand the kind of government action that he doesn't want to do. And now he's being forced into at least something, and that's I think that's an omen for the future.
Do you think that after the 2008 global financial crisis and Great Recession and all that there should have been more pain, more punishment?
Yeah.
Because you hear that about, some should have been, taken to task, banks, et cetera. Because this is now. I mean, we can't really point to someone other than I heard the criticism of United Airlines and stock buybacks and that type of thing. And now they need money.
I wanted to temporarily nationalize, take into receivership a couple of big banks. Because we knew that those banks were surviving only because people were assuming that they were going to be bailed out, or they actually were bailed out. And in the end, the government didn't lose much money in doing so, but that we didn't know that at the time, and it was clear that they were that the option of the prospect of a bailout was the only reason their stock was worth anything. And I thought that the government should have said, look, you exist only because we're there to support you. There's no reason why stockholders should come out of this with any money left, and there's no reason why current management should remain in place. So I wanted to see the government take a couple banks under receivership, partly just as a little bit of justice and a little bit of to encourage the others, as Napoleon would have said, and and just for the public to see that some justice was done. That tried to make that case. There was actually among some of us a now infamous lunch of economists with President Obama, in which we failed to convince him of that. And it was also true that it was legally a little bit difficult. Actually, the law makes it easier to do that now than it did then. We should have done something. And right now, if we're going to be bailing out the airlines, we should not be bailing out airline stockholders. If you want to keep, I personally use United a lot. I'd like to see United remain a viable business entity, but I don't see why United stockholders should get anything out of this.
Sure. And so how do we strike the balance then in terms of the, the programs? Okay, you had the infamous lunch, as you said, from a while back. Okay, so now you're in another lunch. Okay,
right.
And you're there with Steve Mnuchin and others, and you're engaging the conversation. Okay, what's the advice that they're hearing from you?
Yeah, that lunch is not going to happen. But I would say that the same thing. I'm reasonably sure, actually, that we can use the authority created by the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Bill to, in effect, I'd say nationalize, but it's not really. Nobody wants the government to be running businesses on a sustained basis, but we do, I believe, have the ability to do what effectively was done with the auto companies. I mean, the federal government got for a while a controlling stake in the auto companies. It never tried to take over the business of building autos, but it kept the auto companies in business while making sure that taxpayers were not. You don't want to socialize the losses and privatize the profits. And so that's where we are right now. We are probably going to have to rescue some airlines, some other, but remains to be seen. But if we do, then we should just do so in a way that is not rewarding bad behavior. You don't want to be rewarding an airline company for having used all of its profits to buy back stocks during the good years.
Is there anything in history that we can point to look at, to say, okay, you've had this hit, and this hit is relatively short period of time, months, all right, and it's powerful and dramatic, just like the stock market is shown with a plunge, and you'll see the economic, Goldman Sachs has got numbers for first quarter and second quarter that are really to the downside, okay, all right, so now we come through the valley. It's almost like a Passover period, all right?
Yeah.
Stay indoors, let the, everything pass over us. And then, do we have anything in history that we can point to economically that will give us some sense of how this works out?
There's a problem. There's a lot of actual, interesting, if slightly grim discussion going on among economists on this. And there's two models. So sometimes the closest thing we've had to this sort of sudden onset maybe has been we've had recessions that were generated because we had inflation and the Fed put the economy through shock therapy.
Sure.
And after those, we had what everybody calls a V-shaped recession. The economy went plunging and then went zooming back up again. And there's one argument that says that this is not because there are underlying imbalances. This is not like the housing bubble or something where people had run up too much debt and there was all that. And so once the virus threat recedes, then the economy will come roaring back. And I guess that's what everybody's hoping for. The one concern that some people have, and I actually don't know which of these stories is true. The other possibility is that we actually were building up structural problems, but they were kind of concealed by all of the optimism, and that corporate debt had been rising, emerging market debt had been rising, student loan debt had been rising, and that it's kind of when the house falls down, you find the skeletons in the closet. That there'll be the
water goes out and you see who's not wearing trunks.
Yeah,
right.
And so there's some possibility of that. I mean, I don't expect this one. I don't think this is going to be like 2008, where it took about 7 years to get back to anything that resembled full employment. That shouldn't be that kind of thing. But whether everything will look fine a year from now is much more doubtful.
U-shape, more U-shape rather than V-shape. In other words, because when you have the peaking, okay, if you look at the projections of the infections and everything else, you've got a peaking, but it continues.
I've seen that Goldman forecast is one which is so the virus is supposed to follow this kind of hump shaped, and actually everything depends on how high the hump is, whether it overloads our hospitals or not. But the economy, most of those forecasts, which are about terrifying economic descent in the next few months, call for rapid recovery late this year. They don't know that. That's one possible scenario, honestly, I don't know. I mean, if I had to make a picture of it, what I would do is draw a V and then a much shallower, longer U on top of it, and then step back a ways and take off my glasses and get a blurry picture in which either one of them could be true. Because we really don't know. It'd be the cliche about uncharted territory, but we really have never seen anything like this before.
Right, exactly. Who is a person that you admire and why?
Among economists, we all have our, it's a thing. It's where I know a little bit professionally, but Bob Solow, Robert Solow of MIT, who was my colleague during the years I was there, and has always been my model for being, first of all, just a great economist, but more than that, just a incredibly balanced human being. It's just that the humanity, sense of good humor shines through even his technical papers. So there's somebody I really, really admire. And he's in his 90s now and still going strong. And I hope that I can be like that. Actually, who I enormously admire in political life is, in fact, Nancy Pelosi. That combination. Actually, I've interviewed her. I've done your role with her, and you'd never know it, but she's actually not just sharp as a tack, but she's a riot. She's hilarious, and but her ability to stay focused, and we wouldn't have had Obamacare without her. The only sense we have right now is in governance is coming from her, and I have, in an intellectual sense, to be a woman and to be doing that is really amazing. So those would be probably the two people that come to mind right now.
What is the book or books that have changed how you view the world, and how so? And what are you reading right now?
Let's see. When I was a teenager, I read Isaac Asimov's Foundation science fiction novels, which were about mathematical social scientists who saved civilization. So at some level, that's what I wanted to be. I was hugely influenced. I took one philosophy course in college, and I read David Hume about skepticism. About basically the question is, how do you know what you know? Do you know what you know? Where's your, and that has had a tremendous influence on me, just in terms of, you don't take things on faith. You ask yourself, where does it come from? And that had a really lasting influence. And it was only much later on that I learned that David Hume probably wrote the first thing that we would consider economics in the modern sense, even before Adam Smith. So he wrote about a piece called "On the Balance of Trade" in the 1750s, which is the beginning of economics as we know it now. And John Maynard Keynes. It is John Maynard Keynes is general theory of employment, interest, and money is not recommended as light reading. It's kind of difficult and a little bit tortured even for a professional. But you do get a sense of what it really is to think through and to think different. They all think different, but that becomes a slogan. And in fact, but he really did, and that was reading that. I think in some ways, it wasn't until I was in my 50s that I could properly understand what he was getting at, what it took to write that book. What I'm reading now is I mix a lot of nerdy, silly stuff. So I'm reading N.K. Jemisin's science fiction, and I just finished rewatching season 2 of Westworld, so I can start watching the new season, and history. I'm slowly working my way through William Dalrymple's The Anarchy, which is about the rise of the East India Company, which is just fascinating. I mean, again, the history is full of, I'm not sure what the direct lessons are, but it's just, wow. There's a lot of history out there.
Is there one person, dead or living, you would want to interview more than anyone else? If so, who and why?
I would love to interview Julius Caesar, believe it or not. Not because I admire his conquests and all of that, but because what really comes through in everything you read about him and everything, even in his own writing, is that this was somebody who was just way more, he seems to have been ahead of or outside of his time. He clearly had a level of self-awareness and ability to weirdly speaking, for somebody who's conquered the world, he clearly had his ego under control, and he sort of, Cicero, you fought with my enemies, but on the other hand, you're a great orator, so I'm going to spare you and let you continue to supply glory to Roman culture. So that rather weirdly, I'd like to meet Julius Caesar, though preferably unarmed.
Right. Yes, I think that's a great person, really, really unique. This next question sort of reminds me of when Jerry Seinfeld talks about the moment before he was on the Tonight Show and then after. There was like a before and after. So here's this next question to you. Some of our guests can tie their success to one key breakthrough. Did you experience a tipping point in your career?
Oh yeah, I did, but it's a long ways back. I mean, I was 26 years old. I wrote the breakthrough paper in the work that eventually got me the Nobel Prize, and there was literally the way economics works is that stuff gets presented at seminars. So you have 90 minutes. You have a paper, you do a presentation, you're barraged with questions, and I did a 90-minute presentation in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at the Summer Institute at the National Bureau of Economic Research, and my life changed. Everyone said, "Oh, that is a guy with interesting ideas," and all of a sudden, it was, I made that transition from being just another hopeful to being somebody who was taken seriously inside the profession.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely a before and an after. Last question, and I think this is such fun because of the one word in this following sentence. What view do you hold that is most controversial in your professional life?
Oh my professional life. Oh well, I mean it depends. I've had two professional lives, so let's talk about. As a professional economist, I'm probably embarrassingly mainstream. I think largely because the things I did have that might have seemed radical once upon a time are now mainstream. But I mean, in my punditry role, I think being what I say actually in Arguing with Zombies, I talk about being honest about dishonesty and being willing to talk about motives. Because so much of my time is spent arguing against zombies, I find that it's important to say, look, the people making this argument here are not being honest. This is not a good faith discussion we're having, and I'm doing a disservice to the readers if I pretend otherwise, even though journalistic conventions are to always try to be nice and give benefit of the doubt. There comes a point when there's no doubt to give benefit to, and you just have to say that. And then you say if these people are lying all the time, again, to be honest with the readers, you have to say why. You have to say, look, this these ideas are sustained entirely by a network of right-wing billionaires, or something like that. So the willingness. I mean, I don't think I ever engage in personal insults, but my willingness to be rather blunt about what it is I'm arguing with is something that I know a lot of other people in the opinion world find distasteful. They prefer the kind of gentlemanly demeanor, and I say that's just not being fair to the readers.
Mm-hmm. I find there's three ways to communicate: subtle, direct, and blunt.
Yeah, and maybe a little bit below. Yeah, blunt is what I do. It's I can turn it off. I've written government. I spent a year in the U.S. government, and I was very good at euphemisms there. If necessary, I can be. But I most of the time I think it's inappropriate.
Yeah, okay, excellent. We'll see how it all works out. Well, everybody, wishes everyone remain safe.
Yeah.
Okay. Social distancing is what you got to do. That makes all the sense in the world. And I think that, your comments today will help our viewers quite a bit. The book is called Arguing with Zombies: Economics, Politics, and the Fight for a Better Future. This has been wonderful. And if you're not reading Paul Krugman's statements, and if you're not going on YouTube to listen to what he has to say, and even if you don't agree with his points of view, he's a great teacher. And this is a man that you really want to listen to. I have found him over the years to be tremendously helpful and an absolutely fantastic educator, even if I'm not going to CUNY or Princeton before that, et cetera. So, Paul, this has been wonderful. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
If you're ready to go beyond the interview, make sure you visit realvision.com, where you can try Real Vision Plus for 30 days for just $1. We'll see you next time right here on Real Vision.